I was ready to move the calendar when the bailiff snorted, "Another vagrant trespasser. Let's make this quick." The defendant shuffled in wearing a threadbare army jacket 2 sizes too big, wrists cuffed, eyes on the floor. The assistant district attorney didn't even look up. He just said, "Time served and a stay-away order, Your Honor." He slept behind a bakery freezer. Again. I flipped the file, and the name hit me like a round to the chest. Thomas Rivera. My pen froze. My brother Daniel, Sergeant Daniel Cole, wrote that name across sand-stained letters during his last tour. If I make it home, it's because Rivera dragged me out under fire. If you ever meet him, tell him my life belongs to him. Now, Rivera stood in my courtroom, shackled for surviving the cold. "Time served?" the ADA barked. "He's a drain on the city." The word drain echoed. The guard smirked. A few people chuckled. The man in cuffs didn't raise his head. And I felt a heat crawl up my neck, the kind that warns you a moment will define what you do for the rest of your life. Because what happened after I heard that name changed everything. Have you ever watched a room decide someone's worth in under 10 seconds and felt the urge to flip the table? They thought it would be a routine plea, stamp, sign, and move on. But I asked one question that shifted the ground beneath all of us. "Mr. Rivera, did you ever serve?" He flinched. The ADA rolled his eyes. The bailiff folded his arms like a wall. I asked the clerk to hold the calendar. I wrote a note and passed it down the bench to a defense attorney I trusted, Marcus Hale, a legal aid warrior who owed me no favors but respected one thing: truth. In Daniel's letters, Rivera was quiet, stubborn, absurdly brave. In my courtroom, he was small, trembling, and visibly freezing in an air-conditioned box of marble and fluorescent lights. Trauma makes palaces into cold rooms. Marcus took the note, looked at me, and nodded. He requested a short continuance and emergency release to a VA shelter. The ADA scoffed. "Judge, we can't turn criminal court into a charity. He broke the law." But laws have purposes, and their names are people. Over the next days, paper threads led to sealed missions, half-filed medical assessments, and a recommendation for a medal that never left the inbox of someone who retired a decade ago. Witnesses would come. Ranks would be spoken aloud. The city would listen. And there would be one moment, one live demonstration that would silence even the loudest cynic. I can't tell you what it feels like to hold someone's past between your fingers, dry paper that weighs more than any gavel, without asking you to stay and see it with me. Because this wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning. If this story angers you already, good. Stay with me. If a story has ever made you rethink what respect means, tap that like. Your support puts these stories in front of people who need to hear them. I'll tell you who I am before I tell you what I did. My name is Judge Miriam Cole, Court of Common Pleas, Philadelphia. I wear the robe, but I'm also a sister. My brother's dog tags sit inside my chambers in a shadow box I dust myself. I ask clerks to leave it alone. It's not evidence. It's the reason I breathe. Courtroom 3B is all contradictions: ornate ceiling, peeling paint by the radiator, microphones that don't always work, and a bench that turns a woman into a symbol as soon as she sits. On that morning, the gallery smelled like wet wool and coffee. The docket was packed: possession, shoplifting, assaults that were really cries for help, and one criminal trespass: a man who slept behind a bakery on a freezing night. He came in escorted by a bailiff who held his arm just a little too high, the way you do when you want to hurt without leaving a mark. His boots were split at the toe. His cheeks were hollow. His eyes kept flicking to the exit sign as if it were a horizon line he could march toward. "Name for the record?" my court reporter asked. The defendant swallowed. "Thomas Rivera, ma'am." The ADA, Bradley Kent, young, polished, proud of his conviction rate, didn't glance at him. "Your Honor, we're proposing a global disposition. Time served, stay away from the property, and a 3-month probation with mandatory check-ins he'll never keep." A sigh rippled through the gallery. The bailiff muttered, "Should be a trespass-free zone citywide." A private joke, a loud one. I turned a page and saw it. Rivera. My pulse found my throat. Daniel's letters weren't fancy. He wrote them crouched behind crates and in mess tents that smelled like oil and dust. Every other page mentioned Rivera. He's the kind of guy who goes back when everyone else has gone forward. Hard to argue with someone who volunteers to be last. He calls me college boy even though I never was. Says it keeps my head big enough to block a bullet. If you meet him, tell him I kept my promise. I came home to tell my sister he exists. I looked up. The man in front of me had fragments of that mythology. The squared shoulders beneath fatigue, the habit of scanning exits. But time and neglect had carved other lines across him, lines that courts don't record. "Mr. Rivera," I said, keeping my voice even, "do you have counsel?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am." "Does the Defender Association have anyone available?" I asked. Silence. They were drowning in bodies and files. Most days, they had no one left for the late morning docket. I wrote a name on a sticky note, Marcus Hale, and handed it to my clerk. "Please see if Mr. Hale is in the building." Ada Kent lifted his eyebrows. "Your Honor, with respect, are we making special arrangements for—" "We are ensuring counsel for an unrepresented defendant," I said. "That's not special. That's constitutional." Rivera's hands trembled in the cuffs. He kept hitching his jacket up, as if cold gnawed at his bones from the inside out. I asked the bailiff to remove the cuffs. He hesitated. "Remove them," I repeated. "He's not a flight risk. He's cold." Kent cleared his throat. "We're wasting resources here. He illegally entered private property. The bakery owner is furious. The city wants a message. We can't tolerate—" "We can't tolerate what?" I asked. "Sleeping?" Kent looked at the gallery, playing to an invisible jury. Lawlessness. The courtroom door swung open. Marcus Hale strode in, mid-40s, tight afro going gray at the temples, suit frayed at the elbows because he'd rather buy bus passes for clients than new jackets. He nodded at me, then knelt beside Rivera and introduced himself so quietly it felt like a prayer. "Your Honor," Marcus said, rising. "I'll take this." Kent snorted. "Out of the goodness of your heart?" "Out of respect for mine," Marcus replied. "And his." We set a brief recess so Marcus could read the file. I stayed on the bench, rereading the arrest report. It was thin. Trespass behind exterior freezer. Door damaged? The photograph showed a warped latch that looked decades old. A handwritten note mentioned temperatures below freezing. The property manager wanted 0 tolerance. Marcus returned, jaw clenched. "The latch has been broken since last summer, Judge. There's a code complaint on record." Kent shrugged. He still entered where he had no right. "Where would you suggest someone sleep when the shelters are full and the wind is trying to turn your lungs to glass?" Marcus asked. Kent didn't have an answer. He had a script. "We have alternatives." "Paper alternatives," Marcus said. "And if he's a veteran, we have obligations." "If," Kent said, pouncing. "Everyone's a veteran when the cuffs are on." Rivera's eyes lifted, thin voice cracking. "I ain't trying to—" I held up a hand. "Mr. Rivera, one person speaks at a time. Marcus, request a short continuance to verify service history and a release to the VA tonight," Marcus said. "I can have preliminary records by morning." "Denied," Kent snapped. "We're not turning this into a sideshow." I stared at him. My voice went cold. "I am granting a 48-hour continuance. I expect everyone to use that time wisely." The gavel felt heavier than it looked when it met the block. "If you believe second chances require first respect, tell me in the comments what you would change in your city." The next morning, an email waited from Kent's office. "No service record found." Attached was a blurry screenshot of a database search. Marcus arrived minutes later, breathless, tie crooked, eyes on fire. "They're checking the wrong system," he said. Rivera's unit rotated under a task force that got filed under a different command. We need DoD manpower confirmation and potentially declassified archives. Kent folded his arms. Or he's lying. I swallowed a retort. My role requires restraint. My brother taught me restraint is just discipline with a clock. Mr. Kent, I said, you'll cooperate with the defense's record requests. Court order, he smirked. Duly noted. Back on the record, Kent raised his voice so it crawled across the ceiling. Your Honor, the people are ready. We have the property manager here to testify that the defendant scared customers, left trash, and damaged a door. A man in a branded fleece took the stand and repeated the script of every city complaint I'd heard for 10 years. He's bad for business. Families walk by. He never said the quiet part. My profit matters more than his life, but we all heard it. Marcus asked, Sir, did you know the low-threshold shelter 2 blocks away was at capacity that night? The witness blinked. Not my responsibility. Did you know the latch has been broken since last summer? He frowned. He broke it. Code report from August says otherwise, Marcus said, holding up a printout, signed by your maintenance supervisor. Murmurs in the gallery. Kent objected to the tone. Sustained. Marcus nodded, recalibrated, and kept going. He was surgical when he wanted to be. Then Kent pivoted to smear. He held up arrest photos where Rivera looked haunted. This is a menace to the community. My chest tightened. Words can be weapons, so can photographs when you frame them to erase context. Rivera stared at his lap, knuckles white. By late afternoon, Marcus had requested DoD verification and made 24 calls. He returned to court empty-handed. We need more time. Kent grinned. Defense fishing expedition. Meanwhile, this defendant continues to trespass every night he's free. I could see the headline, Judge lets vagrant walk. I've seen careers drown in a single sentence. But then I thought about Daniel's letters, and something in me refused to let fear be the editor. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 10, I said. Mr. Rivera remains released to the VA intake shelter. Sheriff, please coordinate transport. Kent slammed his folder shut. Outrageous. The gallery was a sea of stairs, some soft, some sharp. As the bailiff called the next case, a man in the back flinched at the sound of a dropped binder. He sank down, hands shaking, breath accelerating, the spiraling kind you learn to hear when you've loved a soldier. I clocked it as panic. Before anyone else moved, Rivera stood, slow, deliberate. The bailiff should have blocked him. He didn't. Something about Rivera's posture, calm, respectful, stilled the room. Rivera crouched by the man, murmuring words the microphone didn't catch. One hand hovered open, not touching, showing he was there without trapping him. In through the nose, out slow, feet on the floor. Look at me. You're safe. You're here. The man mirrored him. Breath by breath, tremor by tremor, the wave receded. The gallery went silent in a new way. Respectful, surprised. Kent sputtered. Your Honor, he de-escalated a medical panic, I said. Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And for the first time, he looked at me. A soldier salutes more with his eyes than his hand. If this moment surprised you, keep watching. What comes next surprised the city. When court resumed, Marcus rolled in a cart of binders like he was wheeling a heart into surgery. Your Honor, defense calls Colonel, Redeyo, James Whitaker. A tall man with a clean, old-school fade and a face like carved oak took the stand. He swore in with the crisp, yes, ma'am, you only get from decades of service. Colonel, Marcus said, do you recognize the name Sergeant Thomas Rivera? Whitaker's jaw worked once before he answered. Yes, sir, I do. What was his role? Team leader attached to my unit during a joint operation overseas, he said, on a day when everything went wrong. What do you mean wrong? Whitaker's eyes flicked to Rivera, then to me. Ambush. 2 vehicles disabled. We were black on comms. 3 wounded in the open. Rivera moved back and forth under fire. No cover. Carried 1 man on his shoulders like he weighed nothing. He refused evac until every wounded soldier was out. The gallery held its breath. Marcus lifted a sheaf of papers. Your Honor, these are recently declassified after-action reports released under the Automatic Declassification Review Schedule. He passed a set to Kent, 1 to me. Note the recommendation for Award of Valor. I read the paragraph. I felt my throat close. Kent flipped fast. This is uncorroborated. Anyone could forge. Marcus cut him off with the elegance of evidence. We also have DoD Manpower Data Center confirmation of service. And? He clicked a remote. The screen at the side of the room, usually reserved for grainy security footage, lit up with a photograph. A line of soldiers mud-streaked and exhausted. In the center, a young man with Rivera's eyes and jaw, holding a wounded soldier's arm with his left and a radio with his right. The caption at the bottom, date, unit, location, redacted lines everywhere except his name. Kent stood. Objection to this theatrics. Overruled, I said, voice steady because if I let it waver, I'd fall through it. Colonel, Marcus said softly, who is the wounded soldier in the photo? Whitaker's stare landed on me. Sergeant Daniel Cole. The room tilted, the chain that holds a courtroom together, decorum, distance, deniability, snapped and fell silent at my feet. My brother's face filled a government screen in my courtroom, alive again in pixels and dust. Your Honor, Kent said, tone softened by a thing he didn't want to name. Perhaps we will proceed, I said. I can remain impartial. The record is the record. Marcus's next witness was not a soldier. He called Dr. Lila Mendez, a clinical psychologist from the VA. She explained hypervigilance, moral injury, disordered sleep, why a freezer alley might feel safer than a crowded shelter to a nervous system that doesn't trust doors. And the on-the-spot intervention Mr. Rivera performed yesterday? Marcus asked. It was perfect, she said. Grounding, consent-based proximity, tactical breathing, textbook. Except you can't teach that kind of presence. You earn it. The gallery shifted from seeing a trespasser to watching a man who remembered how to keep others alive when their minds slipped. A line formed between yesterday's de-escalation and a battlefield years ago. Everyone saw it. Marcus closed the binder. Defense rests on this phase. I asked if the people wished to respond. Kent stood, opened his mouth, closed it. No questions. For a heartbeat, the courtroom existed outside time. Just a hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of paper and old wood, and one truth beating against its own delay. The live demonstration had already happened, not on the screen. Here, yesterday, when Rivera knelt by a stranger and brought him back from the cliff, the city had finally seen what the letters in my desk always knew. I looked at Rivera. He was staring at his hands as if afraid they'd betray him and ask for anything. Mr. Rivera, I said. Thank you. He nodded once, eyes bright. Then he lowered them again, the way men do when they're not sure they're allowed to be seen. If you've ever watched evidence change a room, share this story. It might change another. I recessed for 15 minutes and walked into chambers. I didn't sit. My legs didn't trust chairs. I opened Daniel's shadow box and touched glass. You found him, I whispered to a man who wasn't there. When I returned, 2 uniformed officers stood by the door, not to guard but to honor. A small velvet box lay on counsel table, a Valor Medal finally processed after Marcus's avalanche of filings shook loose cobwebs in offices with locked file drawers and older ghosts. Your Honor, Marcus said, we move to admit the complete award recommendation packet, including chain of command signatures and the administrative error that stalled it. Kent cleared his throat. The people do not object. No one cheered. Courts don't cheer. But the silence felt charged, like the air before rain. I granted the motion. The packet slid into the record like a key into a gate. Additionally, Marcus said, we have letters. He lifted an aging bundle bound with a blue ribbon. From Sergeant Daniel Cole to his family, consent provided by Your Honor for defense review, referencing Mr. Rivera's actions. We submit them only for context regarding identity, not for truth of the matter, given hearsay constraints. I swallowed. Received for that limited purpose. Marcus read a line. It tasted like dust and home. If I make it out, it's because of Rivera. You'll know him when you see him. He hates attention and makes coffee like a religion. A laugh moved through the room, a gentle one. Rivera's mouth twitched like he'd forgotten where his smile lived. Then I called General, Rhett. Angela Burns, a woman whose presence could quiet a tarmac. She'd reviewed the packet overnight. Mistakes happen, she said, staring at Kent when she said it, and then back at me. But this one lasted too long. Sergeant Rivera met criteria for valor. It is the position of this review that the recommendation should be granted nunc pro tunc, as if it had been issued then. Nunc pro tunc, I repeated for the record, to correct an administrative failure. Rivera whispered, no. We all heard it. A reflex of guilt learned in the loudest classroom on earth. I didn't save everyone. I don't step off the bench lightly. But robes are fabric, stories are blood. I stood, descended, and stopped exactly where the law says I still am a judge and not a participant, 3 feet from counsel table. Sergeant, I said, using the title as if I could hand it back to him like a coat he had been robbed of, you didn't fail. You gave my brother time he wouldn't have had. Time to send love home. Time to mean goodbye. Sometimes not long enough is all the universe had to give. He blinked fast, jaw working, then nodded once, a soldier's answer to a question he can't survive if asked twice. I returned to the bench. Let the record reflect the court has received the military review recommendation, corroborated by declassified reports, and finds Sergeant Thomas Rivera is who the evidence says he is. Every person in that room sat a little straighter, not because I told them to, because truth has posture. If you're still here, I'm grateful. Stories like this ask a lot. They should. Sentencing arguments had become meaningless. There was nothing left to punish except a city's habit of misnaming desperation as crime. On the charge of criminal trespass, I said, case dismissed in the interest of justice. I cited statutory authority and municipal case law. I cited the weather report from the night he slept behind that freezer. I cited the code complaint about the broken latch and the documented shortage of shelter beds. Then I turned to the part no statute covers. This court orders that the district attorney's office complete training for all line prosecutors on veteran status screening, trauma-informed advocacy, and diversion eligibility within 60 days. I expect a compliance letter filed on this docket. Kent flushed. Your Honor, with respect. With respect, I said. Learn to say the word sergeant like it means someone you might owe your life to. Silence again. But this time it glowed. Marcus stepped back so I could see Rivera. Sergeant, I said, there's one more order. 2 officers approached with the velvet box. I nodded to the clerk, and she read from the citation the way liturgy is read. Slow, loving, true. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The rest blurred for a beat as Daniel's face flashed in my mind. When the words came back into focus, I saw Rivera shaking his head and mouthing, "No, please." Then I saw the gallery rise as one, not as a spectacle, not on command, but because human beings sometimes remember how to be good at the exact moment it matters. The ADA stood too. He didn't know where to put his hands. Sergeant Rivera, I said, this city failed you. Today, we begin repayment. He finally lifted his eyes. Ma'am, he said, voice frayed, I only did what somebody needed to do. Exactly, I said. That's called service. He let them pin the medal. His hands hovered like he feared breaking it. He cried without sound, the kind of crying that has learned how to be quieter than a helicopter. When everyone sat, Kent made his apology. It was stiff, but real. "I'm sorry I spoke about you like a case file," he said. "I'll do the training. I'll lead it." "That's a start," I said. I ordered immediate VA case management, permanent supportive housing, and full medical and mental health services. I requested a liaison to ensure documents didn't evaporate again. Paper is a poor substitute for a life, but it is how we move lives through systems. We would make it heavy enough not to be ignored. As we adjourned, I saw something I will keep until the day I die. A man who had taught himself to be smaller than his fear, standing an inch taller than it. If you've ever witnessed a room choose dignity, share this moment in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I read them. 2 months later, my calendar note read, "Housing check-in." Judges don't normally do those. I do now. Rivera's apartment sits on the 3rd floor of a red brick building near a park where kids learn that air can carry laughter. When I knocked, coffee bloomed from the crack like a promise kept. "Judge," he said, stepping back to let me in. "Call me Miriam," I said, because the robe doesn't fit outside that room. The place was simple. A table, 2 chairs, 1 framed photo. A print of the courtroom screen I'd asked the clerk to capture, where my brother's arm was draped over a stranger's shoulder and his smile looked like defiance. Next to it, the medal in its box, open. "Been sleeping?" I asked. He smiled a little. "Some nights the helicopters still find me," he said. "But now I know where the light switch is." A VA nurse stopped by with meds and a grin. A case manager asked him about his appointments. He answered, "Yes, ma'am." Like every question was another chance to serve. The city kept its promises. Ada Kent sent a photo of the training. 40 prosecutors in a conference room, slides about diversion, moral injury, honor. The caption read, "We're different now. We'll see." But he started somewhere. Word about Rivera spread, not through tabloids but through kitchen tables. A bakery started donating leftovers to the shelter he once couldn't get into. A landlord pledged 2 units a year to veterans with vouchers. A police captain rerouted night shift patrols to do welfare checks during cold snaps. None of it is enough. All of it matters. Sometimes Rivera comes to my courtroom and sits in the last row, hat in his hands, just to watch the machine try to be better than itself. He leaves before anyone can thank him. Heroes are like that. They keep moving. One afternoon he brought a small box. "For your brother," he said. Inside was a coin, scarred, heavy. "Challenge coin," he explained. "His unit gave me this for something small, the big thing we never talked about." I pressed the coin against the glass of Daniel's shadow box that night. It fit like it had been waiting for a home. The epilogue of a life isn't a parade. It's groceries in a fridge. It's a door that locks and a person who knows the code. It's a kettle singing at 6 a.m. It's a city learning to ask a new first question. Not, "What law did you break?" but "What did we break that made you fall through it?" If you walked past Tom Rivera a year ago, you might have clutched your bag and crossed the street. Now, if you pass him, all you'll see is a man in a Phillies cap who makes coffee too strong and insists you take the last donut. He says he doesn't deserve the medal. I've stopped arguing. Some arguments are meant to be lived, not won. If this ending gave you a little light, leave a like. It helps more people find these stories. If you stayed through this entire story, thank you. I told it because I don't want any courtroom, mine or yours, to mistake suffering for guilt ever again. I also told it for my brother Daniel, who taught me that courage is doing the right thing when the room is bored and the clock is cruel. If you've ever watched someone be judged in 10 seconds, tell me in the comments. What would you change in your city to make dignity the default? Maybe it's as simple as learning one grounding technique and teaching it to a friend. Maybe it's calling your council member about winter shelter beds. Maybe it's putting a thermos of coffee in your car on cold nights. Small doesn't mean weak. Small means start. If this story reminded you of someone, your dad, your aunt, your neighbor who's always sweeping the stoop, write their name below. We'll speak them into the record together. And if you want more stories where the camera doesn't look away and the ending tries to repair what broke, subscribe. Hit like if you haven't. Share this with one person who thinks cases are just files. They're not. They're coffee and letters and challenge coins and people who still stand up when a name is spoken out loud. I'm Judge Miriam Cole. This is Heartland Confessions, and this was my confession. Sometimes the bench needs a witness too. See you in the next hearing.